All right, this is the last section of Chapter 18, retiring shares. So there's really only 2 activities that we have to go through. And then we're going to look at the statement of shareholders' equity a little bit more. But I say only 2, but one of them is going to take us a while to do. And that is because it is an excellent review of everything that we did in this chapter. Well, almost everything. If you threw in some dividends into this problem, it would be super comprehensive, all right? But here's the idea. We're going to look at retiring shares, and what happens is we're going to buy back shares on the open market, but rather than putting them in treasury, we're going to buy them ultimately to retire them immediately. Okay, so we're going to have to pay the price that shareholders are willing to accept, and it may not be the same as the original issue price. So we're going to have that PIC share repurchase account for any differences, similar to what we did with the treasury stock. Once those shares are retired, they're no longer considered part of the issued shares. Okay, so we have a situation where we have the stock that was issued. There have been no shares held as treasury. And then on January 2nd, we're going to reacquire shares to retire. And then on a year later, we're going to reacquire more shares to retire. All right, so the questions then: record the entry to issue the shares. It is a great review. Who thought of this? Oh, that was me. All right, this is a great review, so let's see how we're going to do this here. To get the information, I need to grab it in my screen. Sorry. That might work. It's little. I know you can see it. So that first entry to record the issuance of the shares is just going to be a good review. This is the entry that you had earlier. Cash is going to go up. And that cash goes up by $1 million. And the common stock goes up. It's supposed to be an E. Freezing and my pen isn't working. Common stock goes up for the par value of those shares, which is $2, and we issued 50,000, so that is 100,000. And then the paid in capital excess for the difference. And the difference here is 900,000. Make that journal entry balance. All right, so that's the entry that was made when those shares were issued. The second question says record the entry required and retire the shares. So when we retire the shares, essentially what we need to do is we need to remove the original values of those shares from paid in capital and common stock. So to retire these shares, we are reacquiring 5,000 of them. And so if we look at the par value, we know was $2 per share. So what needs to come out of common stock is 5,000 times $2, so 10,000. It needs to come out of common. And we need to take out the paid in capital that was associated with those shares, those 5,000 shares. So here we go back to the beginning, and we see those were originally issued for $20 a share. There's that number right there. For $20 a share, and they had a $2 par, so that means 18 of every $20 went to paid in capital excess. So now we have 18 times 5,000 shares, which gives us a total of 90,000 that needs to come out of additional paid in capital. We see that we had to pay $17 a share. And so the $17 times 5,000 is 85,000 in cash, right? That's just math, right? For those 5,000 shares, 85,000 in cash. This journal entry doesn't balance. I need 15 more to make it balance. On the credit side, that is where my paid in capital share repurchase account is going to come into play. Share repo. Let's call it share repo. All right, so there's my entry to retire, to acquire and retire 5,000 shares. Oh, brother. I thought I'd write a little explanation. It's hard to read. All right, so that was the second entry. The third entry said we do this again a year later. Oh, wait, I have another question. Sorry. Did my entry impact the income statement or comprehensive income statement? Again, this is one of those questions. The answer might be income statement, comprehensive income statement, or no. If you look at this journal entry, those are all balance sheet accounts. So my answer is going to be no. No. All right, so now let's look at the entry to reacquire the shares the next year. And here we are going to reacquire 5,000 shares, and it's going to cost us $25 a share. So the entry is going to look very similar. It's 5,000 shares. We take the par value and the paid in capital excess that went with them when they were issued. We take those out. Here we are going to have to pay $125,000. To make it $25 times the 5,000 shares. So my cash has to go down by $125,000. That journal entry doesn't balance. I have $100,000 on the debit side. I have $125,000 on the credit side. I'm going to use this paid in capital share repurchase account. But remember we talked about this account, the fact that it can only have a credit balance. It's got $15,000 in it right now. So at most I can debit it for $15,000. So I'm going to do that, basically wiping it out. And then the excess, we talked about this in class, the excess is going to go to retained earnings. When in doubt, take the excess to retained earnings. Okay, basically to make it balance. All right, so just to recap on the entry, what we're doing, the common stock piece, this is to zero out the common stock for those shares that we're retiring. We also need to take out the paid in capital excess for the shares we're retiring. We need to use this paid in capital share repurchase to the extent that we can. It can only have a zero or credit balance, so I can't debit it more than 15. And then basically the plug is to retained earnings. So that is how this is going to happen. So at the, my question then says, did your entry from number 4 change retained earnings? And if you look at it, yes, it did. We made retained earnings smaller. Number 6 says, how many shares are authorized after the entries are recorded? If you look, we had originally authorized 100,000 shares. The authorized shares are still 100,000. That number doesn't change. That's in our corporate charter, if you will. That's going to stay there. The next question is, how many shares are issued? Good question. Okay, now here you think about, we originally issued 50,000, and now we have retired a total of 10,000. So my issued shares at this point are going to be 40,000. And then my outstanding, remember the only difference between issued and outstanding are treasury shares, and we don't have any treasury shares here. So those two numbers are going to be the same. So that takes care of that activity. It's a good review. All right, so now we have just a little quiz to follow up on. And then we had a little collaborate thing. Okay, so this next activity, the only difference is that rather than using cash, this is an important thing, we're going to take our treasury shares and retire them. So the entries are going to look just like they did on the last activity, except that instead of using cash to retire shares, we're actually going to just use our treasury shares. So this would be an awesome thing to see if you could do as a review for yourself. Can you do the entry to show the 50,000 shares issued? Yes, that's very basic. You can issue shares. Then I give you the entry. This is from the other day, but make sure you can do this entry too, to reacquire shares at $55 and put them in the treasury. And then we had a situation where we reissued shares out of treasury, right? We talked about that last week as well. And so now we come to this activity today that says we voted to retire 1,000 of the shares held as treasury. So we reacquired 3,000. We reissued 1,000, which means there's 2,000 still in the treasury drawer, if you want to think of it that way. And now we're going to retire 1,000 of those shares that are in the treasury drawer, which basically means we're going to pull them out and tear them up. Okay, so let's look at the entry to retire the shares out of treasury. And I am going to do this entry in a different place on my iPad than I've been doing them before, because I think that side of my screen is hard to write on for some reason. So, my entry to retire the shares out of treasury. Okay, so once again, if I'm retiring shares, I have to take the common stock for those shares out. Maybe I was wrong. I just don't feel like messing with all that stuff. I need a place where I can write. All right, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to just write down here, and I'll just keep moving the... Okay. All right. I need to put the common stock. I need to take it down for the values that were originally put in to that common shares. And so 1,000 shares at $1 par in this example. If you look at the example, it says They're $1 par and $10 a share is what they originally went out for. So now when I'm retiring 1,000 of them, that's going to be a debit to common stock. Oh my goodness. For 1,000. And it's going to be a debit to paid in capital excess for 9,000 because they originally were issued for $10 a share, which means 9 of every of those $10 went to paid in capital excess. So now I'm removing those. We said in the problem that we took them out of treasury shares and that originally we had reacquired them for $55 a share. Okay, so when we retire them and we are going to use treasury, we're retiring them out of treasury, we need to recognize that our treasury stock is reduced by those 1,000 shares, and that was reduced at the $55 cost. So I am going to credit treasury stock for 55,000. 1,000 shares at $55 a share. That journal entry is not balancing because I've got 10,000 on the debit side and 55,000 on the credit side. So that's going to be, all right, so that isn't balancing, so we need to make it balance. So we're going to use this paid in capital share repurchase account again. If you look back at the information, you can see that we used it when we had the entry that reissued shares, this entry right here. We had paid in capital share repurchase of 20,000. So that is the balance that's in that account. So that's all I could use here for my debit from, whoops, get out of the way, for paid in capital share repurchase. So there's my 20,000. This journal entry still doesn't balance. I'm still needing 25,000 more. We saw in the last activity, I told you, when in doubt, use what? Retained earnings. So that's what we're going to do here. Okay, so if you looked at this entry versus the entries from the last activity, you're going to see the only difference is that here we used treasury stock as our credit, and the entries before we used cash. Okay, so that is the only thing that changes. Did your entry include cash? And you would say, no, no cash. No cash here. Oh, that's supposed to be an exclamation point. I made an arrow because I've just been doing journal entries. Did your entry change retained earnings? Yes, it did. It did, in fact, change retained earnings. I'm trying to make a check mark. Ooh, we're so close. All right. How many shares are authorized after the entry? All right. If we look back at the information, there are 100,000 shares authorized, so those are still authorized. Nothing changes authorized shares. Issued, we issued 50,000. Now we have retired 1,000. So that means there are 49,000 issued. How many shares are outstanding? Well, remember the difference. Issued and outstanding is treasury stock. So you need to figure out how many treasury shares do we have. We reacquired 3,000. We reissued 1,000, so that would leave 2,000 in the drawer. And then we retired 2,000 out of the drawer. That would leave 1,000 in the drawer. So there's 1,000 treasury shares. which means our outstanding are 1,000 less than our issued, so 48,000 outstanding. All right. And then I make a comment here, even, pointing out to you what a great review for your exam is to make all the entries for this activity, all the entries, from issuing stock, buying it back, reissuing it out of Treasury, and retiring it out of Treasury. Those would be excellent reviews. All right, what do we have left here? We have a little quiz about retiring those shares just to reinforce your numbers.